So I have some very big questions to start with. Usually start with this little string of very serious questions. Are you a coffee drinker?
Absolutely. Right here.
You got your coffee and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So is there a time during the day when you stop drinking coffee?
About 6 p.m.
6 p.m. Okay. And what about favorite food? Do you have a favorite food?
I like seafood. I like steak. I like all that stuff. Nothing in particular.
Very good. What about a favorite movie? Do you have a favorite movie?
Yes. Well, it connects with my favorite book, which is by Tolkien. So his whole series from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Fantastic. What about favorite city in the world to visit?
Well, I mean, other than someplace in Australia, I suppose it would be Rome. I lived in Rome for 4 years, so whenever I can get back there, I love to. Yeah.
And when did you live in Rome?
2002 to 2006. So I lived in Rome when St. John Paul II died and when Pope Benedict was elected, which is a great moment of my life.
So you were ordained at 97. So you were a priest 5 years or so before you went to Rome. What took you to Rome at that time?
So my Archbishop asked me to go and study theology in order to be able to teach at the seminary. In fact, he asked me to study sacramental theology so I could teach the sacraments when I came back to the seminary. We had a seminary in our archdiocese. So went to Rome to get a doctorate degree in 2002 and came back in 2006.
And what was it like being in Rome at that time in particular?
Well, I mean, I definitely consider myself part of the John Paul II generation in the sense of I grew up with John Paul II as my hero and got to see him at World Youth Day in Denver. That was a landmark moment in my life right before I entered seminary. And so to be in Rome while he was still the Holy Father was such a great grace. And then, of course, to be there when he died and to be there when Pope Benedict was elected, those were moments there of real history for the church. But I was in St. Peter's Square when John Paul II died, and I was in the square when Benedict came out, So to be in those places as that was happening was a tremendous grace in my life, and still feel very connected to St. John Paul II in many ways because of his, spiritual influence upon me.
I went to Mass with about 100,000 other people when John Paul II came to Sydney. When I was a child, my father took me, and I remember we're just so far away from the Pope, but it was a very, very profound experience. And I remember seeing on the big screen, I remember seeing him kneel down after communion to pray and just closing his eyes. And I literally think it's the first time in my life I ever saw someone really pray. We see people coming back from communion on Sunday, looking around, checking their text messages, talking to people, and just the profundity of his prayer and his presence on that screen. I was probably a mile away from him, is unforgettable to me, had a profound impact on me. You grew up in California. You mentioned the Pope coming to Denver when you're a young person.
Yep.
What was
I grew up in Colorado.
Oh, sorry, you grew up in Colorado.
Yeah.
And what was it like for Pope to come to Denver?
At the time I just finished serving as a net missionary, so the national evangelization teams. And so I went kind of with the net teams back to Denver, my home, to be there. And I remember very well, just the experience of his presence, but especially Saturday night, if you've been to World Youth Day, they have these vigils on Saturday night. And I remember I just wanted to get close to him as much as I could. So I left my group and I started to work my way through the crowd just on my own to get as close to him as I could. And I just remember having this sense of like, I will follow this man. I will follow him wherever he goes. And his courage, his love for our Lord, his joy in the way he proclaimed the gospel. And it just had such a profound impact on me that I decided I wanted to be like him. I wanted to try to follow him.
You mentioned NET, and here at Dynamic Catholic, we're huge fans of NET. We've collaborated with them for many years on many, many different things. And we just see the enormous impact they're having on people's lives across the country. I spoke to Mark recently, the founder of NET, and we're having a conversation about the challenges they face of getting young people to give a year of their life, give it 2 years of their life, and do this work. Obviously, as a church, we're familiar with the challenge we face around priestly vocations. And recently I read an article about the enormous challenges the armed forces now are facing, getting people to commit a portion of their life to service. What are you seeing there? What are we seeing as a culture there? What do you see as the solution there? What are your thoughts in general on that?
I think it's a huge problem for us as a culture, and I think it's a shift from a way of a way of life. So part of it's like, what's the imagination of what a good life is like, right? When you grow up, what do you think a good life looks like? And there's an imagination that we put in young people's minds, and they grow up in a culture. And it was just part of the culture I grew up in. Part of it was our Catholic faith and the way that informed our life. But like, a good life is a life where you give your life away and you actually give your life in service. And when you do that, it brings great joy. Now, this is, of course, true with the human heart. And it's St. John Paul II's point about living life as a gift, right? And only when we give our lives away do we find true joy. But if our culture doesn't hold that up anymore as a value, and so young people miss out on that. Now, some people, not everybody, and a lot of people are discovering it even in very different ways. But I think it's something we have to retain. And I'm always pushing amongst our Catholic parents to like, okay, raise your kids to go to college, but actually, you know what? Raise them to give a year of mission and to think about giving a year of mission. Now there are dozens of ways to do that in the Church of the United States, from Focus to Net Ministries to all kinds of different camps and ways that are working, that you can give a year or two of your life, and it'd be the best thing that ever happened to a young person. Certainly was for me. That's where I already thought about being a priest, but during that year where I served on Net Ministry, I started to realize like I could do this and I could be happy. And I started to, I met a lot of priests, and I began to experience the joy of what it is to live without a lot of things and to give yourself away. And that was transformative for me in just discovering some of my own gifts and what my heart was made for.